Hello and welcome to Call of the Senate, a podcast presented by the Minnesota Senate DFL Caucus. I'm Luke Bishop. 2 weeks ago, Republican Senate Majority Leader Paul Gazelka promised to hold hearings on police reform and accountability, giving community members the opportunity to have their voices heard and allowing Minnesotans the opportunity to engage in a public discussion about potential changes to our law enforcement system. Majority Leader Gazelka has since walked back that promise, instead opting to negotiate public safety legislation and police reform behind closed doors in conference committee, denying the public the chance to weigh in on the matter. Yesterday, members of the Senate DFL joined the Senate Posse Caucus in sending a letter to Governor Walz, Speaker Hortman, Majority Leader Gazelka, and legislative leaders to demand that the Senate begin immediate negotiations of the Judiciary and Public Safety Omnibus Bill with a deadline of May 3rd for the bill to come to the floor for a vote in both chambers of the Minnesota legislature. This approach would mean that the Judiciary and Public Safety Omnibus Bill, which includes provisions on police reform and accountability, would be negotiated and voted on separately from other bills. Governor Walz expressed support for the proposal and urged Senate Republicans to put politics aside and take up the proposal. Here to talk about it today on the podcast are Senator Omar Fateh of Senate District 62, Senator Patricia Torres Ray of Senate District 63, and JaNaé Bates of Faith in Minnesota, which is the political arm of Isaiah. Thank you for joining us today, everyone. So I'd like to begin with Senator Torres Ray, who's the chairwoman of the Senate Posse Caucus. Senator, could you just explain a little bit about your approach and why you think it's important that the Judiciary and Public Safety Omnibus Bill be negotiated immediately and independently from the rest of the budget bills?
Thank you, Luke. I think we thought it was incredibly important that we send this letter and communicate to the public what's going on. As the public probably know, the Senate never had hearings. So we don't have a position of the Senate. And when people started hearing that we were going to have hearings, they expected the normal process, really. They understand how the process of the Senate, of the legislature goes in terms of having hearings and inviting the public to be part of that. That didn't happen. Then the majority leader announced that we were going to negotiate these policy in conference committee. So constituents started thinking, oh, now we're going to have hearings. Well, we're not going to have hearings because this process is quite different. So we need to educate the public about the process of conference committee. It could happen behind doors. It could happen in the middle of the night. It could happen at the end of the day. That is how this process had taken place in the past. And more than anything else, people understand that these conference committees are ultimately negotiation pieces, that at the end people trade and bargain with one budget versus the other. We don't want that to happen with these particular provisions. We want this to be done in the open. We want to be done ahead of time, and we don't want these provisions to be used as bargaining items at the end of the day without public input. So that was incredibly important, and the public also needs to know that the Senate has the gavel. So what that means is that we're not going to start this conference committee until the Senate calls the conference committee to work. And so all of these pieces are quite complex for the public. They really need to understand how these dynamics work and what could happen at the end. And we don't want this to be left to the last minute, to be done behind doors between a few people and then be announced. We want this to be open.
So can you explain a little bit why you want it to be open, why it's important to have it in the light of a public hearing versus behind closed doors, and how the public having the opportunity to weigh in can make a difference?
Because the Senate never had a position. The Senate never had a hearing. So the public is completely unaware of what the Senate is going to propose, what the Senate wants. They just really don't know. On top of it, I want the public to know, to really observe who was appointed to be part of the negotiating of the conference committee in the Senate. Really, 4 members of the Republican majority who have very, very conservative backgrounds, who really have records of fighting against this reform in the floor time and time and time again. They really have. And so the public really needs to know really what we should expect. Since we didn't have hearings, since we didn't hear the Senate issue a public opinion about what is that they support or don't support. Well, we really know what they don't support. They don't want any reforms. That's what they have said. So it's incredibly important that we have public hearings so people really understand what the Senate position is. To this moment, we just don't know.
So you also just mentioned there that the Senate doesn't have a position. The Senate hasn't taken a vote. There hasn't been any hearings. So where's the holdup? Why is the Senate taking action on this, and who's preventing the Senate from taking action at this moment?
The Senate is not taking action, look. It hasn't taken action at all. So that's our main concern. So when they do take action based on the record that we have of their absolute opposition to reform, I mean, we presented very reasonable amendments in the floor. They declined to incorporate that in the judiciary bill time and time and time again. Their reluctance to do any type of reform of the police is so evident. So we're very worried about what's going to happen in conference committee. That is absolutely, the concern that we have, and we want the public to be engaged. It's just that simple. We want the public to know what is going on, so that they are not surprised at the end, not understanding how did we get to this result. But we're proposing in the Policy Caucus that we get to the result immediately, so that the community will be engaged right now in the process of really understanding what the Senate Republicans really want to do with this bill.
Absolutely. And, so I want to pivot just a little bit to Senator Fateh here with, you had mentioned Senator Torres Ray, the statement that the Posse Caucus released earlier this week, and the reforms that were proposed in the police accountability measures. So Senator Fateh, I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to the specific measures within that and the specific reforms that the Posse Caucus would like to see passed and signed into law.
Yeah, no, thank you, Luke. There's a lot of things we can do, but I want to take a step back. Last year, after the murder of George Floyd, the Senate and the House the Posse members got together and they came up with a list of things that they want to see done. There's negotiations that were done with leadership and with Republicans as well. And through those negotiations, they came up with a bill that honestly did not go far enough, but it came with the commitment from Leader Gazelka that negotiations would continue into this session and that we would have hearings. And in that time, as Senator PTR mentioned, there has been none. Right now, I believe we've had about a dozen bills in the Senate that has not gotten a single hearing, while the House has done their best to move things along to make sure that we do not adjourn without doing anything. We think that would be tragic. Now, since last year, we've had a second national death, right, with Dante Wright in Brooklyn Center. So we have this sense of urgency that we need to act now. A few things we can do is, number one, there's a bill to end qualified immunity. Right now, officers can escape legal liability for civil rights violations unless the victim can show that their rights were clearly established at that time. So it gives a need for that there has to be a legal precedence, right? Which is the reason why officers are immune to any new charges. I believe Representative Aisha Gomez has a bill around a civilian oversight council of law enforcement, and that would allow local government units to establish a civilian council that could make decisions regarding complaints victims file against officers and impose discipline based off of their findings. Number three, there's also a bill being carried in the House that requires body camera footage to be released to families within 48 hours, but also prohibits the data from being deleted. And there's also a bill coming out in the event of what we've seen, the tragic death of Dante Wright, the murder of Dante Wright, I should say, which would address the issue of minor traffic stops, such as expired tabs, lights being burnt out, hanging things from the rearview mirror, things that are secondary offenses. to make sure that does not happen ever again. Now, to the second part of your question, what can we do in terms of investment in our community, right? So there's a couple of pieces to that. Number one, we have the Promise Act that has been led by Senator Bobby Joe Champion and Senator PTR. I'm also a co-author on that, which would include funding for reinvestment, specifically into areas that were heavily damaged during the unrest after the murder of George Floyd. It'll invest in businesses as well as low-income and affordable housing. Number two, Representative John Thompson and I partnered on the Philando Castile bill, which I'm a chief author in the Senate, and Representative John Thompson is the chief author in the House. And it's been named after a Black man that was murdered by police here in Minnesota. John Thompson being his best friend, who came up with this comprehensive bill. And this is probably, I believe, the most comprehensive bill that will target systemic racism in the greatest way in our state's history, right? And I wrote down some of the funds breakdown. There's going to be $70 million dedicated to African American arts, $50 million for DEED to invest in entrepreneurship through both training and financial assistance for the Black community. There's $80 million for housing stability. There's $30 million for 5 community centers in St. Paul and Minneapolis, St. Cloud, Rochester, and Duluth. There's $40 million for lunch debt forgiveness, which is important for our kids, right? There's $20 million for STEM access and training, and there's $10 million for urban agriculture. So those are just a few of the things out of the over $400 million bill, which we believe can do a lot to tackle systemic racism. So this is really important to our community, and I think would provide the greatest amount of support. Now, I want to just mention a couple of things. Racism is not something that just exists in our culture, right? It is both cultural, but it is largely economic. And I think the Philando Castile bill would affirmatively counteract the centuries-old economic prejudice that we've seen. It will allow Black people not only to build wealth, but they could build wealth specifically through home ownership, which we are greatly lacking in this state. It provides significant investments for Black community to develop Black leaders, to step into leadership roles within their community, which honestly they're already doing, but now it would just allow them to do so with the economic financial support by the state and the endorsement of the state. It'll give dignity to our Black children, providing opportunity for success in education through things like counseling and tutoring, and I mentioned before, lunch debt forgiveness. So it is a big spending bill. Like I said, it's $400 million, but to be honest, it's not an expense, it's an investment. And it's relatively small compared to our state budget. It is relatively small compared to the scope of the issue of systemic racism. And it's really small compared to what it will deliver in returns, not just for the Black community, but for all Minnesota. So this is a good bill for Minnesota's economy. And when you consider things that have happened, like the COVID-19 crisis that has affected all of us, this bill would effectively double as an economic recovery spending bill for this crisis. So we believe the time is now, if not now, when, right? This country was founded on wealth extraction from the labor of Black people, and that legacy will just not fade by itself. It needs to be uprooted, and we have a chance to do so right now.
In that answer, Senator Fateh just spoke about both the need for police reform, but also for longer term investments in communities of color. And JaNaé, this is an area you've had quite a bit of expertise. You've pushed a dual track approach to the issue of public safety, just as Senator Fateh spoke about. So you've emphasized the importance of addressing both police reform and changes in law enforcement, and also addressing systemic inequities. So can you tell us a little bit about this approach and your solutions as to how the government can address both of these simultaneously?
Yeah, so in just all of the ways that was just mentioned, that the reality is that as we continue to push for police accountability in the House and in the Senate, we also know that even if we got all the brownies, all the things that we wanted around policing accountability, we would still have the systemic issues that allow police to, quite frankly, be able to murder Black folks with impunity and have considered us a second, third class, right? So these communities, we know that the communities that are highly considered safe, it's not just that they're not over policed and underprotected, they also have ample housing and thriving school systems and, wonderful healthcare and livable wages. Like, there is no coincidence that, the median income of those who are currently incarcerated before they were incarcerated was $19,000 a year. And though the studies haven't been done, none of us would be surprised to find that the people who are murdered by police have a very low median income. So when I believe through, and not just because, I think so, but through research and experience and just all of us living in the world, we know that there has been a tried and true really concentrated way and tactic to get us to divest from what we consider to be government, from we the people, right? And it's a three-pronged system. And it works by stoking racial fears to heighten economic resentment so that we have a disgust with government. And that works very cyclically. And so unfortunately, when we separate, these things and silo them, we actually aren't hitting at the shell of the whole point and purpose of it. The point and purpose is that for us to not believe in a collective we. The point and purpose is so that we don't believe that the government is we the people. It's just them. It's just a handful of folks in a Capitol or a City Hall or a White House. And that's not true. And so what has been incredibly effective in getting Minnesotans to lean into the best version of ourselves is reminding us that actually we have control and accountability and agency to be able to work together across race, across region, across income, to make sure that we all have the things we need to be able to thrive, to create the safe communities that both keep us safe in terms of like community harm and also from those who are sworn to protect and serve and have failed to do that. And so when Senator Torres Ray, mentioned that, Senator Gazelka, Senator Limmer has, shown absolutely zero political will to hold hearings around policing accountability. Let's also be clear, they've shown zero political will to hold hearings that actually fund the lives of everyday Minnesotans. And so those things are in tandem, and we have to be able to call those out into the light. So yeah, that is a lot of the work that I've been doing, of course, with Faith in Minnesota, with these wonderful senators and House leaders, to ensure that we're actually making sure we connect the things that need to be connected, because we want to make sure that all Minnesotans, regardless of where they live or what color their skin is, can be able to breathe, can be able to care for themselves and for their families.
So you alluded to this a little bit, but I want to ask about it specifically. And so in your piece, Deliver Black Dreams, which I thought was fantastic, you outline the systemic issues within our systems of law enforcement, and you offer solutions sort of one by one to each one of those issues. And at the very top of the piece, you write that your number one goal is to clearly connect resources to safe communities. That's the number one goal. So can you just talk about what that goal means to you and how you think it can be accomplished?
Yeah, it is really literally being able to name the fact that, and we should do it in like everyday language, what I say, like talk about the brownies, like be able to talk about like the everyday things and not the recipe on how we get there. But the fact is like a child born in Minnesota should be able to be born into a community that is safe, where they're free to be able to play on their playground, where their parents don't have to worry about harm or violence, where they can go to a school where they're, properly cultivated, they're in a healthy learning environment that has quality teachers who are paid a livable wage, where, even as a younger age, they be able to go to childcare where they get that same learning environment while their parents are making a living for them. If they, fall on the playground and break their arm, they should be able to go to a hospital that is nearby and fully resourced to give them the quality care they need to mend it. Like, these are things that actually cultivate all of us into the people that we need to be and should be able to have. And yet those things get extracted and exploited from our communities. And very, very often, the darker those communities are, the more extraction and exploitation that happens. And so it harms all of us across the racial spectrum, the political spectrum, the income spectrum, and yet we still get pitted against one another. And so when all of this happens, when police forces come in and they're completely unaccountable to the people, to the residents who live there, when we can't have, when mayors and governors can't even tell them to stop harming us, that's a problem. And yet, because these communities have continued to be extracted and exploited from, the loudest voice that we tend to have in that time, and I'm not saying that it's not powerful, but the thing that we're constantly yelling is stop killing us. And the reality is that is the lowest bar, like the lowest bar possible. Stop killing us. Us having to tell Senator Gazelka and Senator Limmer do something so they stop killing us is horrendous. And then their response sounds reasonable when Senator Gazelka says, oh, well, we need to look at these things or listen to these things to, figure out if change is warranted. And there's literal blood in the streets. That is reasonable wrapped up in it. That is evil wrapped up in reasonable paper, right? And so what we actually need to do is raise the bar and say, it's actually time not just to stop killing us, not even just to say Black Lives Matter, but let's deliver Black dreams. Let's actually push for what we really deserve and not just stop the bad things from happening. Because we know in this country, when we actually do, for those who are the most vulnerable, for those who are the most marginalized, for those who are the most harmed, it actually benefits all of us. When we look at, the Black Panther Party in California, starting the school lunch program, that has drastically shifted childhood hunger across the nation in every single race, right? And so we know that when we actually work together across race, we get the things we need. We're able to thrive, and being able to connect that is really imperative.
So before we wrap up here, I want to circle back to Senator Torres Ray. You've spoken quite a bit, Senator, about the importance of getting the public involved in this and having the public be informed on this issue. So while Senator Gazelka and Senator Limmer may have locked the public out from getting involved directly in this through hearings, I'm wondering what you think the public can do. How can they still have a voice? How can they make their voices heard? How can they demand this change?
I think it's absolutely essential that we engage the public throughout Minnesota. Yesterday I was interviewed about this whole issue of divided Minnesota, whether rural people want this or not. I believe they do, and we need to hear that. I believe the entire state of Minnesota. As a matter of fact, I was telling the person that interviewed me that this House bill has been vetted. We know that the public want these provisions because they have had hearings. They have had participation of law enforcement in their hearings, supporting and testifying in favor of these provisions, right? So we have had ample opportunity to engage the public in that conversation with the House bill, and we have multiple constituencies, people of faith, law enforcement, experts, teachers, health providers who came and testified in favor of these provisions. And these people are from all over Minnesota. That's why we believe very, very, very strongly that we need to engage the public. We know for a fact, based on the hearings that were took place in the House, that the entire state of Minnesota is with us. And we also have organizations, faith-based organizations, all types of organizations that have thousands of members in their working with them on multiple issues. And they know that Minnesotans really want these reforms, and they want these reforms now. So that is why I think it's imperative that we have the public engaged in this conversation. We need them to talk to and to hear their senators speaking about this issue with such a reluctance to accept that their own constituents want this change, and also that we want this direction of investment. And this is not, it's a pretty important message that both Senator Fateh and JaNaé talk about, because it's a nationwide, we have established through research, when the bottom goes up, everybody goes up. This is Angela Glover's, 101 on economics. If you invest in the poorest communities, in the ones that are at the bottom, everybody else will benefit. And that is the proposal that we have before the state of Minnesota. And we need the public engaged in this conversation today.
Absolutely. Well, JaNaé Bates, Senator Patricia Torres Ray, Senator Omar Fateh, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. I appreciate you guys coming on to join to talk about this important issue.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
That's it for today's episode of Call of the Senate. You can find us online at senatedfl.mn or on social media under the username SenateDFL. See you again next week.